Alex, I don't know if word has gotten around yet because it did just break within the last half hour or so that the FBI was solely taking on this investigation. But you are on the scene where these protests are unfolding, and I'm wondering what you're hearing from people.
That's right, Chris. We're here at the Wivel Building. It's a federal building in the Twin Cities area where ICE has been operating. Protesters have been here for now 4 hours now, starting at 7 a.m. We did see tensions rise. We did see tear gas, at least 2 arrests earlier this morning. Things have calmed down a bit now, but there's something that's a little bit unique in this confrontation between protesters and police, and that is that law enforcement officials and the protesters are having an open discourse. At least in my reporting experience, often the law enforcement is taught not to necessarily engage with the police, trained not, or with the protesters, not to talk to them back and forth. What we're seeing here is actually a back and forth. Now, I want to introduce you to somebody. She looks like she's in the middle of one of those conversations right now. Her name is Sutu. She's a therapist from the area, and she tells me that she's here to try to de-escalate the situation. Here, I'm going to dip the microphone in to see what she's telling these law enforcement.
Because of the mask. You guys should not be using the masks.
Sutu.
Thank you.
Hi. I just wanted to know, what are you doing here today? What are you hoping to achieve by talking to these people?
Just engaging the officers in a dialogue to consider different possibilities in such a stressful situation when something is escalating, and how to de-escalate something while keeping everything safe. They have to be mindful of their own staff, their own colleagues, and public alike. And what just happened yesterday was a classic example of how somebody's lack of training can ruin somebody's life. An officer's life is ruined. I'm sure he didn't want to do that, but he's justifying it as if he was protecting himself. Makes sense for him to protect himself, but that's a lack of training. When somebody think, oh, I have to do something when I have to protect me. Yes, they have to do something, and that doing means go away, move away. They don't have to use lethal force. It is only supposed to be used when there is no other possibility available. When there is no other way to protect, then you use lethal force. But that person decided to use a lethal force, and he could have done something different.
And Sutu, last question for you, very quickly.
Yeah.
You told me you're a therapist.
Yes.
We've obviously seen tragedy here in the last 24 hours.
Yeah. It's painful.
Talk to me about the impact that it's having on your community, on yourself.
I do crisis management, and I get suicidal clients, like clients who end up feeling suicidal, and doctors refer them to me. So I get clients directly from providers, and I see 3 or 4 suicidal patients a day, and it's just been overwhelming to the community. And people want to talk about the politics. Us therapists are trained to not talk about the politics, and it's just been very exhausting for me to do my job when so much is going on in community. Yes. Hard. Yes. I feel for them. So many officers will say they don't want to be here. Makes sense. And they lack the training. One officer saying that they need more training. Other officer said, I don't know what else could I have done. And I'm like, I can hear that thought. Can we entertain that thought? You said you don't know what you could have done. Can we open a dialogue when there is a situation, when something is escalating? How can we communicate fast with each other? They need to be mindful of their training, what they learn, and practice that and talk to each other. This could have been avoided. So many deaths, 30 plus more deaths. I don't know the exact number in Venezuela. There were 30 plus numbers that were killed by the ICE agents in the last couple of years. So many people, these deaths can be avoided. I watch 4 or 5 hours of news a day, work 16 hours a day, and it's just not enough. Same is happening with public. Same is happening with senates and everywhere. It's just happening everywhere.
Sutu,
this all can be avoided.
Sutu, thank you so much. I appreciate your time.
Thank you.
And you heard it there, Chris. Obviously, a community very much on edge here in the Twin Cities.
Yeah, you can obviously hear the emotion and see it in the numbers of people who have come out over the last couple of days. So, Paul, let's talk about the investigation and the fact that there is not going to be local involvement in it that it's going to be solely part of the FBI's purview. I want to read, if I can, from a DHS memo from 2018 on the use of deadly force. It says it must be reasonable in light of the facts and circumstances confronting him or her at the time force is applied. And those guidelines go on to say deadly force shall not be used solely to prevent the escape of a fleeing subject. However, deadly force is authorized to prevent the escape of a fleeing subject where the officer has a reasonable belief that the subject poses a significant threat of death or serious physical harm to the officers or others, and such force is necessary to prevent escape. Again, we have some limitations. We don't know what happened before, but from what you've seen on the videos, what do you make of those guidelines and whether they were followed?
It does not appear that they were followed. The ICE agent positioned himself near the point of near the front of Ms. Good's car and then fired shots. ICE regulations say that officers should avoid deliberately placing themselves in positions where they are at risk and then using that as an excuse to shoot in self-defense. Law enforcement officers are also trained not to shoot at a moving vehicle. That almost always makes a bad situation worse. Most times it's not an effective way to stop the car, and it puts innocent bystanders at risk. Even when it works to immobilize the driver, it turns the car itself into this 5,000-pound unguided lethal weapon. And Chris, as you noted, officers are not allowed to use deadly force unless there's a danger to life. So the videos appear to show that Ms. Good was driving away from the officers when one opened fire. So the investigation will center on that moment. Did the officer reasonably believe he was acting in self-defense because his life was in danger? Some of the witnesses have said that Ms. Good posed no threat when the officer opened fire.
So, Philip, and I keep thinking about what the therapist had to say and how we bring the temperature down, right, which seems like a pretty high goal at this point in time. But there was one member of the administration who broke with Kristi Noem and with the president, and it was Tom Homan, the border czar. Here's what he said.
The investigation just started.
Just started. You say you can't comment on the video, which many Americans are seeing and reacting to.
I'm not going to make a judgment call on one video when there's 100 videos out there. I wasn't on the scene. I'm not an officer that may have body cam video. It'd be unprofessional to comment on what I think happened in that situation. Let the investigation play out and hold people accountable based on the investigation.
How do we get, or can we get at this point, because so much has already been said, to let an investigation find what actually is happening? And again, understanding what you and Paul have both said, the questions that will be raised about the impartiality of what the FBI might find.
Yeah, I mean, the Homan interview is striking. One wonders if he did not know that Kristi Noem had already come out and tried to blame the driver for this incident. It's speculative, but it was, what was striking about it was that was the way in which we would normally expect an official to respond, to say, let's wait and see what the investigation says. You know, one of the things beyond that was also missing from the administration yesterday was any expression of sympathy or empathy for the family that was affected here, which I think is striking as well.
In fact, suggesting that the victim was a domestic terrorist.
Right, exactly. Homan responded in the way that one would assume that an official would respond in a situation like that. But I think he also made a really important point here, which is that imagine the space we would be in now if we didn't have these videos. All of these people out there taking these videos. Imagine what we'd be in if the only word we had for this was what's being said by the administration, what's being said by Noem and by President Trump. I think our understanding of the situation would be very different. And so I think that his point about the fact that there are all these videos out there which demand our attention, we ought to be paying attention to them because they are also going to tell us the story.
So the Star Tribune spoke to the father-in-law of Renee Nicole Good, who said she had a 6-year-old with her late husband. 2 additional children, he believes, are living with her extended family. She died just blocks from where she lived. She was remembered there as a good neighbor. At the end of the day, are these real impacts on this family, real impacts on her friends and her community, real impacts that you're seeing in the emotion of the therapist that we just heard from, in her trying to spend much of her day counseling members of the community, does all that get lost in, I guess, all the political talk?
I mean, I think all this can be very personal. Look what you did to me, Chris. I have a 6-year-old, and live TV is great.
Who, by the way, I've met and is super cool.
Seeing the image of those stuffed animals in the glove compartment of her car, really emotional for me. And, I take away from this is great. What I take away from this is, for me, that's the thing that stands out, that this was a family that could have been like mine. And there are a lot of situations, a lot of incidents that have involved ICE, have involved the government over the course of the past 13 months, in which there is resonance for other families in similar ways. And for me, it's hard to think about that family being affected in this way. And I know that there are lots of other people affected in that way. And I think it's important for us to remember the way in which we respond to these things, because that's the humanity. And that's, I think, fundamental to what America is understanding that all of us can be in these situations and all of us should be able to avoid them, particularly when they're so unnecessary as the shooting yesterday was.